Hey everyone, I'm Domenico Montanaro, senior political editor and correspondent.
And I'm Asma, Khalid, a political correspondent covering the presidential election.
And we're going to talk a little bit about the battleground map and how it's changed in the last month or so. A lot of things moving toward Joe Biden, the Democrat, in his direction, and a couple big changes from our last map that we want to unveil. First, Colorado, we're moving from lean Democrat to likely Democrat. Pennsylvania, a big state that President Trump won last time, we're moving from toss-up to lean Democrat. Nevada, also a state that Hillary Clinton won but was very close, moving from toss-up also to lean Democrat. Georgia, we're moving from lean Republican to toss-up now because of where a lot of the numbers and the organization have been. And the big one, we're moving Florida from toss-up to lean Democrat. That was a tough one. We've got Asma Khalid with us, who has been in Florida actually reporting from a key county. Asma, what are you finding?
Well, I'm in Duval County. I'm home to Jacksonville, and as many folks probably remember, it was supposed to be hosting the RNC, and it is a traditionally Republican county. It has not gone for a presidential candidate, a Democratic presidential candidate, since 1976 with Jimmy Carter. But why I came here is that it has been trending bluer. In 2018, this county actually did go for the Democrat at the gubernatorial level, and really, folks describe it as a purplish county. But both Republicans and Democrats do have a hunch that Duval County could potentially go for Democrats. But look, symbolically, it would be a big change. This county hasn't gone for a Democrat in decades.
Yeah, and I mean, look, it's part of a bigger suburban trend across the country where we've seen this movement since President Trump, frankly, took office, where President Trump won the suburbs in 2016 very narrowly, but polling has shown him down by historic margins in the suburbs to Joe Biden.
Part of it is also, though, that in the suburban communities I've visited, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and then even here in Jacksonville, which folks kind of joke of as being this overgrown one large suburban community, there is a sense that the way the president has handled the racial protests in this country since the killing of George Floyd, just it's leaving a lot of displeasure. I would say amongst white college-educated voters, African-American voters, all kinds of voters, and part of that speaks to the growing diversity of the suburbs, right? These are not sort of segregated pockets that maybe they were decades ago, despite the rhetoric we've been hearing from President Trump. And Republicans will say, look, it's not politically correct to always say you're supporting President Trump in certain circles. And so there is a belief that there are, quote unquote, secret Trump voters, and that maybe the polls are kind of underestimating the support that there is for the president in this country. And so I'm curious, regardless of whether or not maybe that is accurate, do you see a path when we look at the map for President Trump?
Absolutely, and that includes holding on to a lot of what he had last time. And there's a couple of caveats here. First of all, about a place like Florida, where, Florida's been one of the closest states in every presidential election in quite some time. And, it's a state that went against the tide in 2018 of a Democratic wave where it elected a Republican governor, a Republican senator. And that's not something to, sort of dismiss out of hand. Also, when we look at the polling, Joe Biden has stayed around 49%, 50%, which is great for him. But a lot of his lead that's expanded nationally has been because of a drop for President Trump with his voters, with independents, for example. The Trump campaign, the Biden campaign even, feels like Trump could make up a lot of that ground because at the end of the day, some of those folks will say that they are voting for Trump, even if they won't tell pollsters right now that they're voting that way because they don't like how he's handled some of this stuff. Of course, we're not going to know until Election Day, but I do think that
election week.
Right. But look, Democrats are certainly more fired up, I think, this time as far as being unified single-mindedly against President Trump and not underestimating whether the fact that he could win re-election. Well, that's it for us. For more, log on to nprpolitics.org to see our full battleground map and download the NPR Politics podcast.